Hey guys, welcome back. Everyone likes to talk about the squeeze test when it comes to how moist their vermicompost should be in their worm farm. I'm going to show you how to get the moisture levels right and do it in large quantities in today's video. My name is Steve Churchill, and this is the Urban Worm Company. Hey guys, a properly run vermicomposting bin should be somewhere around 70% moisture. But honestly, that's a useless number unless you have a way to approximate it. I suppose you can get one of those moisture probes on Amazon, but to tell you the truth, those things get corroded really easily. The readings can be way off, and you're going to get different readings all around your bin, especially if you're feeding chunks of watery food waste like melons, tomatoes, and things like that, because your probe can run right through a chunk of that watery food waste and give you a very high reading. A better option, and the one I like to use, is called the squeeze test to give you that 70% moisture level. Simply take a sample of your vermicompost and give it a squeeze as hard as you can. If it's the proper moisture, you're going to get a drop or two of water coming out between your knuckles. In other words, the right moisture in a worm farm is when most of the moisture has been squeezed right out of the material. Less than that, and you affect the worm's ability to breathe as they breathe through their skin, and it requires water to facilitate that. The worms are also going to lose weight, and microbial activity will slow in your worm farm as you approach 50% moisture. More than that 70%, and you start to risk getting anaerobic conditions. So your compost and vermicompost have what are called pore spaces, which are those little empty spaces between the particles of organic waste. And when the material is too wet, those pore spaces are filled with water instead of air. What happens is that the microbes consume the available oxygen in the liquid, and that liquid prevents new oxygen from entering the pore space. So the vermicompost can turn anaerobic, and you can start to culture some nasty pathogens in your worm farm. They can also start stinking. So the best way to get 70% moisture, and this is the most important thing to remember, is to start with 70% moisture. But that doesn't mean we have to manually squeeze every handful of bedding and food waste that we put in our worm bin. And that's what we're going to get to today. Now, if you've been watching my channel for a while, and if you haven't already, just do me a solid and like this video and hit subscribe. You know that I call myself a lazy vermicomposter. I'm a normal person and I don't want to work that hard at vermicomposting, and I'll do whatever makes it easier. I keep a shredder right inside my patio door and a 5-gallon bucket right outside my patio door, which is where I dump my food waste. So when it's time to feed, what I do is I take my bedding and food waste and I put them into a bin or a 5-gallon bucket. I use about 2 parts bedding to 1 part food waste by volume, and you can go down to 1-to-1, but I'd rather err on the side of too much bedding rather than too little. Now, let me quickly talk about what bedding is. This is that carbon-rich material like shredded cardboard, shredded paper, peat moss, cocoa coir, leaf mold, or you could use a material I really like called pit moss, which is made from recycled paper. You got to buy this stuff. I do like it because it breaks down really easily. I also like the idea of adding a few wood chips to the mix if possible. Okay, so what I then do is I add way too much water to this mixture and I let it sit, mainly to allow the water to fully saturate that dry bedding. After I've given it a good 12 hours of soaking, it's time to use the bucket trick to compress the excess water out of the material. So I mentioned 2 5-gallon buckets, right? We don't have to buy new ones like I did. You can use any 2 5-gallon buckets as long as they fit inside each other. What we're going to do is drill a few holes in the bottom bucket. It probably doesn't matter what size of holes we're talking about as long as you're giving enough of a chance for that water to escape. And I like the idea of using a 1/4-inch drill bit, maybe up to a 1/2 inch, and drilling 6 to 12 holes or so in the bottom. And make sure to drill from both directions, and that helps you get those little plastic shaving nubs out of there. And make sure to throw away those shavings. We don't want those getting into our vermicompost or our soil. So the bucket with the holes, we'll call this one bucket 1, and we'll call this one bucket 2. We're not doing anything special with this one. Once that's done, we're ready to go. Take that watery mix of food waste and bedding and put a good amount of it into bucket 1. Take your empty bucket 2 and place it inside bucket 1 and press down as hard as you can. Maybe even sit on it. That weight's going to compress your bedding and food waste, and it's going to push the water out of the holes in the bottom of bucket 1. You might even take bucket 1 and set it on a couple bricks so you know you've got space underneath there for that water and that moisture to come out. Now you notice that the little side rims of the bucket prevent the bottom of the top bucket from actually touching the bottom of bucket 1. That's not a big deal as long as bucket 1's about halfway full. That's just going to get you enough of that compression. You may even want to take bucket 2 out of there, mix up the contents of bucket 1 again, and compress it again with bucket 2. Once that, you've just done a mega squeeze test and your material's ready to go right into the worm bin with just the right amount of moisture. Now, over time, especially if you live in an arid climate like Colorado, New Mexico, or Arizona, your worm farm's going to lose moisture, but you can always add a few squeezes of water from a spray bottle. Remember, it's always easier to add moisture than to try to remove it from your worm farm. Now, I know I'm going to get some comments about this, so let me just nip this in the bud right now. In the beginning, I told you that too much moisture leads to anaerobic condition, and then I told you to water the heck out of your bedding and food waste. But as long as you're not letting that stuff sit in there for days, you won't be giving it enough time to go truly anaerobic and to start to culture those pathogens. Your mixture is going to be safe then to add to your worm farm or urban worm bag in 2-inch layers or so, without the risk of it producing leachate, which is the mystery juice that can sometimes collect in the bottom of a worm farm. The issue with the stackable tray systems, and this is a bit of a rant coming up, is that damn tap at the bottom, which makes you think you should be creating this juice, which people wrongly call worm tea. What's worse about creating this leachate is that worms are attracted to moisture. And if your bin is running so wet that you're producing leachate, the worms are never going to move higher into the upper trays as advertised. They're going to move down into the bottom trays or even into the very bottom catch for leachate where they're going to drown. So if you're using a stackable tray system, you can only get the worms to move higher by ensuring that the upper trays are the most moist. But this can't happen if your upper trays are so wet that they're literally dripping down into the lower trays. Whew. Okay, thanks. If you're new to vermicomposting, or if you're even an experienced vermicomposter, wouldn't mind a refresher on a few things, I'd like to send you the Worm Farm Roadmap, which is going to be your worm bin startup guide. It's a soup to nut guide for beginners, taking you from the choice of your worm farm all the way to how to best screen and then use your worm castings. Click this little link above my left shoulder to get that guide right now. Okay, guys, I hope that was helpful. And remember, the best way to get 70% moisture in your worm farm is to start with 70% moisture. And you don't have to squeeze every bit of material by hand. Do the bucket trick and just nurse the moisture from then on with a spray bottle, and you'll be good to go. We'll see you on the next video.